Hello everyone, and I hope you're all having a good day. Today I'm joining with Aakashi Kapoor of Microsoft, and we're presenting Moving to Passwordless Authentication, Purpose, Products, and Procedures. So basically we'll be talking about the why and how to go passwordless. So I'll start the presentation, and then Aakashi will join in, and then we'll have questions at the end. If you do have questions, I'd like to remind you to use the chat feature. They'll only be shared with the presenters. And then also we have posted a survey, so we'd like to remind you to actively participate, and we're definitely look forward to your feedback so we can better serve you. All right, so with that being said, I'll start the presentation today. My name is Michael Gwynn. I'm the Director of Strategic Projects at FEITIAN Technologies. FEITIAN U.S. headquarters is in Santa Clara, California. As you can see on the right side, FEITIAN is a member of the Microsoft Intelligent Security Association, as well as a seated board member on the FIDO Alliance. FIDO is Fast Identity Online. So, quick information about FEITIAN. Our mission is to build secure, innovative, and value-priced security products to provide an improved user and host experience for authentication, identification, access management, and payment. We've been in business for over 20 years. We have around 1,000 employees with over half in R&D, and we have numerous clients in over 100 countries. And again, we are a member of the Microsoft Intelligent Security Association, as well as a board member of the FIDO Alliance. Just a quick view of some of our customers and our clients, and some of our partners that we work with. And then to give you a quick image of what passwordless looks like, here we have a user going in with their FEITIAN K33 all-in pass security key using Bluetooth. They identify that they want to use Bluetooth, and he's put his biometric fingerprint on, and he's logged in through Windows Hello to Azure AD. Let's talk about the why to use passwordless and the challenges that are out there. Identity attacks obviously threaten organizations every day. Just going through some of the numbers, there's 4,000 plus ransomware attacks every day, over 300 million fraudulent sign-in attacks, and 167 million daily malware attacks. I've talked to people in the security business, and when new enterprises have systems where they can see their attacks. Often when they turn it on for the first time, they think they're being targeted because of so many attacks, and it's not. It is often randomized. They'll attack everybody throughout different organizations. But if you are large organizations or working in finance or trade secrets, you may be even more targeted. A lot of the data breaches are due to passwords, and that is either weak, default, or stolen passwords. So about 81% of the breaches are caused by credential theft, and sometimes that theft is somebody finding that little yellow tab that you have underneath your computer, the little sticky note that has your username and password on it. And then 73% of passwords are duplicates, and that's very easy to do the hack called credential stuffing, where if you have a repeat of a password and somehow the bad guys get access to that, they try to use that password in all of your accounts, and often it's successful to gain entry. And then on the bottom, 50% of employees use apps that aren't approved from the enterprise. So that's a key part because you're opening your system into being hacked. So research has found that 99.9% of attacks can be blocked with simple multi-factor authentication. and that's where we are today. So here's what I call the Jeopardy board of different passwordless or password hacking statistics. A couple to note, just want to let you know this is from the FIDO Alliance, this information. On the bottom left-hand side, Microsoft estimates that every day humans spend 1,300 years dealing with passwords. And that's entering them, waiting for a reset of a password, or having to think up new passwords. So that's a lot of time. And then the cost to businesses on the right-hand side in the middle, $5 billion annually in to businesses due to password-related hacks. Here's some up-to-date information from our friends at Google. They have seen, as well as other observers of the marketplace, have seen a serious increase in phishing and hacking attempts. Here is the number of phishing sites through March of 2020. So you see the significant increase there. And as passwordless becomes a more viable option, more and more people are using it. So Microsoft confirms that over 150 million people are using passwordless methods every month. And on the bottom left circle, with the 67% of American consumers surveyed by Visa have used biometric authentication and prefer it to passwords. Right, so that's a growing number, have a desire to use biometric instead of passwords. Gartner has a prediction that 60% of large and global enterprises and 90% of mid-sized enterprises will implement passwordless methods in more than 50% of use cases. And that's a continued increase there. So you can see that the passwordless authentication is definitely catching on for those who are aware of the value that it brings, and it's evidenced in the prediction and the forecast from Gartner. This is just a very quick overview. We'll go a little bit more in detail of what the FEITIAN passwordless security keys and smart cards look like. Some of them are with the fingerprint biometric. Some of them are not. Some of them have Bluetooth, NFC, and some of them are in the card form factor. So you have options to use it in a card form factor and combine it with other functions. So this is, again, just a quick overview. Here's just a summary of the why passwordless authentication. Passwords on the chart to your right there. Passwords are very convenient, but it's low security. And then we went with two-factor authentication, and that's in the top left-hand side, where it's very inconvenient to wait or to use that second factor, most often in an email or text, but it is a higher level of security. So what we're working with now in the password authentication gives you the best of both worlds in the upper right-hand quadrant with high security and easy convenience. So for users, for the enterprise organizations or the businesses using these, you have reduced hacking opportunities, identifies the actual user, and you even have an opportunity to use three-factor authentication with the fingerprint biometrics. For the users, there's no passwords to remember, there's no passwords to reset, and there's no passwords to have the temptation to use for multiple accounts. For the IT department and the costs for the enterprises, 20 to 50% of all help desk calls are regarding password resets, and then the average help desk cost for a single password reset is roughly $80 and $70 and increasing. Quick quote from Brett Arsenault from Microsoft is talking about a friction-free experience, and it's using biometrics that allow people to use fingerprints to authenticate. And it basically makes the technology easier to use and more accessible to the needs and preferences of the person. And it also makes it extremely hard for the criminals. So what we're doing with Passwordless is making it very easy for the users to use, easy for the organization or the enterprise to implement, and very difficult for the criminals or the bad guys out there trying to exploit. The FBI agrees with this in their publication from September of last year. They note that the cyber criminals are getting smarter in their efforts to do the hacking, and multi-factor authentication is a great way to offset that. And then in the third point, it's consider using a more complex form of multi-factor authentication for users and administrators, such as biometrics. Again, FIDO Alliance is fast identity online. Here's just a quick summary of anything that is FIDO 2 or passwordless. Some of the benefits are, because there are no passwords, there is no secret stored on a server, number one. Number two, you can't authenticate, the authenticator cannot be tricked by phishing because of the asymmetric key pair. The private key always stays in, and it's simulate the asymmetric key pairing with the application. So it cannot be tricked with this process. And number three on the bottom, there's nothing to remember, so it's a very easy process. And the big thing about, the other big thing about passwordless is when people think about passwords is that they have to think up new ones, and enterprises make them longer, on passwords longer and more intricate, so it's easier and harder to think of new ones so that you remember it without having to reuse it. And then number four here, simply it's a single gesture, as you saw in the image, and very convenient for the user to do the password login. And now I'd like to turn it over to Aakashi Kapoor. She's a senior program manager with Microsoft, and I will have her share her files and take over from here.
Thanks, Michael. So let me just quickly share the deck and we'll get started. Okay, thanks, Michael. Hi, everyone. As Michael mentioned, my name is Aakashi Kapoor, and I'm a senior PM for Identity Division within Microsoft. And I focus mostly on hybrid security features, features that bridge the gap between on-premises and our customers moving to cloud. And that's where Passwordless comes in, and I own the hybrid portion of Passwordless. So so Michael has already given why we are trying to do this and why we are going on a journey where Passwordless is essential to our customers. And in my portion of the session, I want to focus on how do you actually move on that journey? Like, what are the options that are available from Microsoft's point of view, and where do we partner with FEITIAN, and how can you move and get this enabled for your organization? So Michael touched upon this very briefly in his section on the balance between high security and usability for the customers. And this was also something that was on back of our mind when we were trying to create these different options for passwordless authentication. That as soon as you start going towards a high security feature, the customer usability starts taking a toll, right? So there has to be this balance between usability versus high security standard that we want to achieve. And when we were designing all these three options, that's where they come in, is that we have tried to strike this balance between usability versus high security. So even though passwords and, as Michael just laid out the context, passwords are something that no one likes, and by no one I mean people who care about it, like security teams or anyone who knows about security does not like passwords. But users still really like passwords because they are easy to use, even though they are not very secure. So with that, we wanted to create options where it is very convenient for your users to use them, but then they are also really highly secured. And this is where all these three options from Microsoft come into picture. So even though this conversation is focused on FIDO2 security keys, we also wanted to give you an overall array of options that are available for you to go on to a world without passwords. One thing I want to call out before we get into the details of each option is that these options or these solutions are very specific to the scenario that your organization has. So we don't expect that we will only have one credentials in an organization. We don't see a world like that. What we think and what also happens in Microsoft is that you may have multiple scenarios in your organization and you may have a need for having multiple credentials to fulfill those. So let's get started on the options and we can then talk more about the scenarios. So the first option is Windows Hello for Business, and this is Microsoft's premier passwordless experience. This is something that 95% of our employees use today, where we start our laptop and then the biometrics recognizes us, it winks at me, and then that's it, I'm in. And it is also FIDO2 certified, and it is very specific to use cases where you have a one-to-one relationship between your user and the device. That is, the scenario is that you have informational workers or your mobile workforce which carries a laptop for their work for day in and day out, and they need to log in to their device using biometrics or Windows Hello for Business. In this, as it is FIDO2 certified, it is unphishable credential and it can be used for any sensitive resources. The second option is for non-Windows devices, right? Or environments where mobile first is key, or there are no Windows devices, and most of the workforce uses Android or iOS phones to log in and get to their work. And this is where Microsoft's Authenticator app is very handy. So this is an app which can, which again, I'm sure a lot of you are already using for MFA. Right, so the good thing with this Authenticator app is that you can also use it to sign in as passwordless, and this can also be used to bootstrap Windows Hello for Business if you have both the scenarios in your organization. So again, as I said, we don't envision a world where there's going to be just one credential for an organization. Most of the times you will be using 2 out of 3 of these credentials. And then the third one, which is the focus of this conversation, is FIDO2 security keys. And this is, we are thinking of scenarios where there is a shared device and there are multiple users trying to access apps and resources on those devices. So think of scenarios like manufacturing floors, retail floors, or even hospital, where there are multiple users and multiple workers trying to access the same device for different needs and accessing different apps and resources. So instead of again and again logging in and out with using passwords, FIDO2 keys are very, very convenient way for them to just plug it in and then either use a PIN or biometrics and get access. And as I said, this is again, it's FIDO2 certified, and as Michael went through over why they are secured, this is a very highly secured way of giving access to your users. We also think of scenarios where this will be handy is where it can be like a break glass scenario for like your CISOs or CEOs or specific highly privileged admin groups which have sensitive resources they need to keep secured, and FIDO2 keys can be used for those alternate login IDs as well. So again, I want to just reiterate this point that these 3 options are not exhaustive of each other. They are supposed to be working together. So for example, in Microsoft, we use Windows Hello for Business, but we also have users who have FIDO2 keys for their sensitive resources. And then there is a mobile first population, which are like, using Authenticator app. So all our employees on retail floors and things like that are using FIDO keys for their shared devices. So again, when you're trying to go on a journey for passwordless, you will have to keep in mind what are the scenarios your organization has, and then accordingly decide which options work for you, or there's a combination of options that needs to be taken care of. So moving on to the architecture under it. So I think Michael already touched a little on it, but I just want to emphasize it that the good thing with all these 3 options are that they are based on the same architecture. And they are very secure authentication flow. It's all based on asymmetric cryptography, where there is a public-private key pair that's created, and it is something that is unphishable. So private keys are securely stored on the device. So the private keys never leave the device. So it's not like passwords where passwords are either synced or, password hashes are synced and they are sent between different domains or different devices. The private keys do not leave the devices. So even if so it's very hard to just break them. And to invoke the private keys, a local gesture is required. So it can be either in form of a biometric, if it's a biometric key, or Windows Hello for Business, or a PIN in case there's a fallback, or some keys only require a PIN. And they're always bound to a single device and they're never shared. And that is why it's very secure. Now, as we start talking about FIDO2 security keys, I do want to touch briefly upon FIDO and what FIDO standard is. So FIDO is a Fast Identity Online Alliance, and it was formed in July 2012. And most of our partners and Microsoft as well is part of the board member of FIDO, as FEITIAN is as well. And it has, so FIDO Alliance, they work with all the different vendors and partners across the industry to come up with these specifications and security standards to ensure that this is a very high level of security that can be achieved through being FIDO2 certified. And 2019 was a very key year for FIDO Alliance because 2019 is when they came up with this WebAuthn protocol, which is very essential, and most of Microsoft solutions also, and in FEITIAN solutions, also use WebAuthn and CTAP protocols from FIDO. And 2019 is also when Microsoft Windows Hello for Business became FIDO2 certified. And since then, we have been seeing a lot of vendors releasing FIDO2 security keys, and a lot of innovation is happening in that space in terms of biometric keys and different form factors. And I'm sure Michael is going to walk through all the different options of keys available with FEITIAN on that. This is more for people who are interested in the details on what WebAuthn and CTAP are, so I'm not going to go into the complete details of this slide, but just touch briefly on the two main components of FIDO and how it supports the solutions we have been building. So the first one is WebAuthn protocol, which I just mentioned was developed in 2019, and that is the protocol between the client and the server. So it can be like, between your browser and, a relying party like Azure AD. Right, so if you're on Microsoft solutions. So that is WebAuthn, and on all our solutions which support FIDO and Windows Hello for Business also implement this protocol underlining in our solution. The second protocol is CTAP, and this is between the browser and the hardware. So that can be a roaming authenticator, for example, a FEITIAN key. So this is where CTAP comes into play, where it is between the authenticator and the browser. So that's just more for anyone who's interested to know what the details are. And these roaming authenticator can be connected to the browser anyway, like to the device anyway. It can be through Bluetooth, it can be NFC, it can be a USB, any of those ways. One thing I do want to call out is what is the difference between passwords and FIDO2? Like why is FIDO2 secure? And I know that Michael already touched upon it, but just to re-emphasize the importance of why we think FIDO2 is secure, and especially like difference with passwords, right? Because FIDO2 also has a PIN and a biometric. So the first thing is that FIDO2 is based on asymmetric cryptography, right? So there is a unique pair always created for like a public and private key. And this is it is unique. Nobody can repeat it, and it's not very easy to get hold of the private key. The second one is that for passwords, there is a way where the user can, end up being a victim of the phishing attacks and give away the password. But in case if it's a FIDO2 key or FIDO2 certified authenticators, using the PIN is not going to help anyway. So if someone is still overlooking your shoulder and finds out the PIN for your FIDO2 key, it's not going to be useful to them unless they also steal your FIDO2 key. Right, so and that is not that easy to do. So like think about like someone trying to, like you are on your airport using your Windows Hello for Business and logging in and someone sees the PIN. It's not going to help them unless they can somehow steal your laptop too. They can't just log into an Office 365 account and enter your PIN and get away doing something with it. That's not how it's going to work. So that's what makes it very, very secure. And also PIN is a fallback, right? So the first way of authentication, and all these are strong authentications, right? So the first thing of authentication is who you are and what you have, and that is a device and biometrics. So only when biometrics are not there on your key or does not work is when PIN is used. So it's pretty secure in that terms. And then the third one is the bad actors definitely like passwords, because it's like you literally have, somehow they can get to the servers, and these are just symmetric keys that are stored there, so they can get to the username and passwords and then do a lot of harm from that. But in case of FIDO keys, even if someone gets hold of the public key, it's not going to be useful to them because the private keys don't leave the device. So that's just to summarize on why we think FIDO2 key is secure. Now, how does Microsoft and Azure AD help you to get in your journey and start using FIDO2 security keys? So we have a lot of solutions in public preview right now. We launched hybrid support for FIDO2 keys in Azure AD in February, and that has been in public preview as well. So today in public preview, you can use a FIDO2 security keys to sign into your Azure AD joint devices, as well as hybrid Azure AD joint devices. And doing that, you also automatically get an SSO to your on-premises and cloud resources. So even if you have a hybrid environment and have hybrid Azure AD joint devices, and then you have these traditional Kerberos or NTLM resources back in your on-premises environment, if the user is using a FIDO2 key to sign into their Windows devices, they won't be prompted for passwords to go access these on-prem resources. And that is something that is in public preview today. And we will talk about how the solution works and how you can get it implemented. But that is available for you to test it out today. And one thing that we've been hearing from our customers, and was a prime focus for us when we were developing the solution, was the first thing was the deployment model, right? So even though we have Windows Hello for Business, the one feedback that we got from all our customers was that we need a simplified deployment model, because hybrid, and especially for hybrid environments, right? Like there's too many moving components. We need to ensure that there is a simple deployment model and it can be easily tested by their users. And then the second one was, to have a generalized solution, right? So that every time there's a new modern credential that comes in, we don't have to go and change our on-prem infrastructure or add more components to it and make it even more bulkier. So those are the two things that was our design principles that we kept in mind when we were working on the solution. And how we achieve that is and this is focused on the hybrid environments, right? So how do you go and deploy support for FIDO2 keys in your hybrid environments? So to achieve the first goal of simple deployment model, it only requires 3 components. The first one is the latest version of Azure AD Connect. So if you're a hybrid environment, you must be using some, Azure AD Connect to sync between Azure AD and an on-premises Active Directory. And you would need the latest Azure AD Connect. That would be any version from 1.4.32. And this is literally any version that came out this year. And one thing I want to call out here is that we do not use Azure AD Connect to write back anything on premises. Azure AD Connect is required to deliver the bits that are needed to complete the configuration for hybrid environment. And we'll talk about those steps as well. The second component needed is the Windows Insider build. And I think this week, starting this week, it's no longer an Insider build. The Windows client version just released this week. So now it is available in public and it is supported by Microsoft. So it's no longer an Insider build. So the latest Windows 10 client, 2004, is what has the support for FIDO keys. So you would not need the Insider build anymore. And then the third component needed is your DC should be fully patched. And the server patch for 2016 and 2019 is already available and publicly supported. So you can just use those and patch your DCs. One thing I want to call out here is that we're not saying that you should patch all your DCs, but you have to patch the DCs enough so that it can balance the load of the clients that would require FIDO2 support. So it has to be enough, and it would depend on your organization and the load that your DCs can handle. But that's just one call out I wanted to make, that we don't want you to just go and update all the DCs, but in a sufficient number that can handle the load of the client. Now that we've spoken about the deployment, how does the solution work? Right? How are we making it work for hybrid environments specifically? Because it relies on Active Directory, which does not understand these modern authentications. So that was the biggest challenge that we were trying to fulfill when we were trying to make this journey on passwordless. Like, how are we going to make Active Directory understand these modern authentications and give access to these traditional resources that are sitting on premises? So what we did here is that we created something that we are calling an Azure AD Kerberos server object, and it is created on premises and it is published in Azure AD. And we flipped the trust model. So instead of Active Directory being the source of authentication, we are first authenticating to Azure AD, and then using that to get a ticket to, an SSO to on-prem resources. And this Azure AD server, the Kerberos server, is a representation of your domain controller. So one thing I want to call out here is that there is no physical domain controller that is being created in Azure AD. It's just a representation. And it is just used so that we can generate the Kerberos tickets, the ticket granting tickets, to access these on-prem resources. And to keep in mind with our second goal of having a generalized solution, this is built using modern code. So we can, ensure that any new modern authentication that comes, we can expand it to those. Now, how does the authentication flow work? So authentication flow, the way it works, and this is sounds like a lot of information here, so I'm still going to go through it, but if there are questions, we can definitely handle it in the end of the session. But the first step is that when a client is logging in using a FIDO2 key, once they log in they're trying to log into a Windows device, which has Windows 10 client, using a FIDO2 key, it first authenticates to Azure AD. And once Azure AD has authenticated it, it then goes and checks the tenant for the Kerberos server key that is matching the user's on-prem AD. And once it gets that, it generates a partial Kerberos ticket granting ticket. It's also called a Kerb TGT for people who are interested in the technical depth of the solution. And it generates that partial TGT. And that ticket granting ticket does not have any authorization data. It only has user SIG. That's why it's partial. It's exactly similar to a regular Kerberos TGT. The only difference is that it does not have any authorization data. And then in the next step, this partial TGT is then returned back to the client. Now here, Windows gets a PRT from Azure AD, and it's got a partial TGT. Now in next step, Windows then contacts the on-premises Active Directory, because it's a hybrid environment, and then redeems this partial TGT for a full TGT. So now the client has a PRT for cloud resources and a traditional Kerberos TGT for their on-prem resources. Okay, so before we go into how we set this up, I do wanted to do a quick demo on the user experience. So I know, like Michael showed, how the user experience is very straightforward using FEITIAN key. But here I just want to show how does it look for a hybrid Azure AD join device. So I'm again using a FEITIAN key here. It's a biometric key, so it's pretty quick and it logs me in. So as you see, it asks me to just touch my key and then I'm in. And I'm just going to show that this device is a hybrid Azure AD join device. So I'm going to use dsregcmd status to just see the status of the device. Now, as you can see here, it is an Azure AD join and domain join. So it's a hybrid Azure AD join device. Now I'm going to go and get some access to file server, which is an Kerberos resource on premises for us. So I'm just going to type in the path for the file server. And as you can see, it did not prompt me for a password and gave me an SSO to this on-prem resource. Now I'm going to go back and just type klist to see the claims that I got for both of these operations. So as you can see here, I have two TGTs two claims rather, that I got for signing in and accessing my on-prem resource. Now, how do you get started? So it's all good and it seems a very user-convenient experience, but how do we get started? So all this information is also available in our public docs, which is, I think we should be able to share once we send after the survey when we send a wrap-up. But the first step is that for your organization, you will have to enable security keys as a passwordless authentication method for your tenant. And how you do that is that you can use the Converge registration portal that is in public preview right now and add FIDO2 security keys as a passwordless authentication method. And this is how it's going to look like. This is already available in preview. And as you can see, you have a FIDO2 security key here, and then it also has Microsoft Authenticator app. But then here you can go and either enable, disable FIDO2 security keys, also target a group of users that you want FIDO2 keys to be used for. And for beginning, the allow self-service setup has to be set as yes, because the users will have to go and provision the keys or using my security info and my sign-ins on and security info portal. So they'll have to sign in, provision the keys on there. Now the second step is, let me just go back, sorry. Okay, so the second step is that you have to prepare your Windows devices. So here you have to enable sign-in for using security keys for your devices, and that you can do through Intune or GPO, and the instructions are again available on our public docs. So once we share that, you can go ahead and do that. And then the third step, which is an essential step for hybrid environment setup, is deploying the components required for hybrid access. So this is what I was saying when I said that we don't use Azure AD Connect to write back anything on premises. Azure AD Connect is helping us get these bits that can be used to then go and create this Azure AD Kerberos server object. Now, I do have a demo on showing how simple it is to just create these Azure AD server Kerberos object. And once you get the latest Azure AD Connect, you would see a new folder, Azure AD Kerberos there. And if I'm just listing down the components of that folder, and when I list that, I can see the PowerShell module called Azure AD Kerberos. And here I'm just importing that module. Now, once the module has been imported, I am just trying to type and see all the commands that are part of this module. And I type in get command, Azure AD Kerberos server. And these three commands are now available with Azure AD Connect. So the first one is get Azure AD Kerberos server. If you use this command, it will help you just list the new object that has been created. So it's used after you create the Azure AD Kerberos server object. The second one is remove in case something goes wrong and you want to delete and try again. And then the third one, which is the most important command, is set Azure AD Kerberos server, which is used to create the Azure AD Kerberos server object. Now, how do we actually go and create it? So here, I'm going to just show you how I'm going to use the set Azure AD Kerberos server command, as you can see, and I'm just giving my credentials, and it's just one command, and it runs pretty quickly. So now, as you see, I've already created the Azure AD Kerberos server object. Now here, I'm just typing in get to see the different objects that has been created. And it shows me all the details of, one second. So yeah, I'm just doing a get. So I'm just using the command get to get all the different objects information on the Kerberos server object that has been created. So you can see here, this is the ID, and we have different key versions for on-premises and cloud, but they both should match. So that is one very high-level eyeballing to be done to ensure that it's being created properly, is that the key version on cloud and the Active Directory should be exactly same, which is 130.4408 here. And this has all the other information about this object, and this can be viewed in your, in the properties on your domain controller as well. Now that was how you get set up in making FIDO2 key work for a hybrid environment. But as this conversation is also about passwordless, I do want to give you a framework on how can you think about moving onto a passwordless journey for your organization. And this is where we have been working with a lot of customers to come up with this framework on what we think is very beneficial to help customers get on this journey and think about how they want to achieve it. So the first step on this funnel is, we think of it in terms of a funnel. So the first step in this funnel to move on to your passwordless journey is that you should have a presence in Azure AD. Now with that, I don't mean that you should just have users in Azure AD or have an Azure AD subscription for your tenant. But what I mean is that you also need to put some thought around what kind of users, what kind of groups, and what kind of access you want those users to have. So for example, do you want to have global admin in your tenant? Do you want to have first-line workers as a separate group? What kind of permissions that these users in that group should have? And those are some thoughts you need to put together before you start moving onto your passwordless journey. This helps you understand what is the security posture for a tenant and how do you want to handle those scenarios as you go on this journey. The second step is to enable Azure MFA. So passwordless requires a strong authentication. And the way you can achieve that today, like if you want to register a new passwordless credential, is that you would require a strong auth to do that. And that is where Azure MFA today is a requirement, a prerequisite for you to even get started. And we are still discussing if this is a prerequisite, but so far this is what helps us get a strong auth for passwordless journey. And that's the second step that you would need. The next step is to then understand your app landscape, right? Like what apps do you want your users to use? Are these apps in modern auth or not? Or do you have a plan to move them to modern authentication? Is there an app migration plan that you need to put in place? Or do you already have apps that use modern authentication? So this is for you to understand the landscape of your organization and then make a decision on how do you want to pilot this or, make it accessible to your users. The next step is then to identify and get these, capable hardware. So this is where you would work with FEITIAN or other vendors that we have and understand what kind of hardware do you need to get on this journey. Right? So for example, and this is very specific to your scenario. So for example, if your organization has retail workers and most of the retail workers, especially in this time, are working with PPE, then maybe a biometric key may not be something that you would want for everyone. You may have scenarios where you may need biometric key for people who are maybe working from home, but for those people on the floor, you may need a key with a PIN or some other way to do it. So this is why it's very important to put thought on what scenarios you're trying to fulfill, and then understand if you have the capable hardware for it. The next one is to use a credential management framework and ensure that you are piloting it or piloting it and phasing it out when you're rolling it out to your users. And with the credential management framework that we already have in public preview, you get that capability when you can, use just a group of users and try it out. So, just to ensure that you are thinking about it overall from your scenario perspective and then trying it out in a phased manner. And then the last step is to have your users train the users, right? Like ensure that they understand what's the right thing to do, and then just educate them about strong passwords, strong authentication, and why passwordless is important for your organization. Now with that, I think we're coming to the end of it. I'm not going to go through this slide because it is a lot of information and a lot of information has already been covered in different sessions. But if I have to just talk about it in 3 seconds, I would say that in the next 3 months, you should focus on your users, on identifying the scenarios that you have for your organization, creating a pilot and testing out FIDO2 security keys, reaching out to your vendors, reaching out to FEITIAN, get the keys, and then do a small pilot, understand what kind of scenarios you want to handle. And then, as I said, the Windows client version is out as well. So to use that to start thinking of a plan, like how do you want to get the latest Windows version and how do you want to move on to your passwordless journey for the next 6 months. Now with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Michael, who's going to walk through the different products that FEITIAN has. Michael, over to you.
All right, appreciate that. And one second, I'm just pulling this up. And I'd like to remind everybody that we do have a survey afterwards. And there is talk that on the follow-up email, we may offer some prize incentives to fill out the survey to anybody, whether you filled it out before or after. So we do ask you to visit our survey site. It is also in the comments in the side presenter to audience announcements. So there is a link to that. So both Microsoft and FEITIAN would value and very much appreciate your participation in our survey. All right, so let's go on from there and just go that together, FEITIAN and Microsoft will be bringing you true passwordless authentication. And in the PIN itself is whether or not it's considered still a password. Aakashi went over some of the points to it, that you would still need the device. You're still entering in a number or information into a device. and that's the PIN. So if you have a computer and you want to make sure that it is the proper person that accesses the computer, FEITIAN provides a number of different ways to do this. We have the Bluetooth, as well as NFC, as well as the USB ports. And now, as an aside, we recently released a security key with Lightning connection on one end and a USB-C on the other end. So there's numbers of different ways to do that. So the information from this individual is on their computer, and they really want to make sure that it's only the correct person that gets it. At FEITIAN, we're using the biometric on the non-connected security key to access that. So the computer knows that it's not just someone who's typing in a passcode or a username or a password. It's someone who's actually supposed to be there. Quick information and video on the parts of, just go back to that. And stand by. All right, this is examples of using the keys. This is a K27 key in the USB port, and they're indicating that they're using a security key. Touches it once with a fingerprint, and through Windows Hello, he's into Azure AD. In this example, they're using the K33 all-in pass, and this device has USB-C as well as NFC and BLE. Here they're using BLE. And remember, only the public key information is exchanged through BLE, so it's very secure. To put in the fingerprint, now you go through the Windows setup and your sign-in options. Whenever you set up a biometric key, you will always have to have a PIN associated with the key. So the first part of the process is to establish a PIN for the key. And then to put the biometric fingerprint in, it's going to ask you again for that PIN. So if somebody finds your key, they just can't simply add a biometric to it. So in this case, they're doing a number of touches. The biometric is stored cryptographically inside the key only. So it's very important to remember that. And FEITIAN has a number of different keys that are biometric and non-biometric for passwordless, as well as in a card format that could be used as a wearable with multiple other functions. So let's go through just a quick process. I know Aakashi, we're kind of duplicating in some regards, but I'm just simplifying it down. That in this process, the user wants to log in with the security key, server requests authentication. The user does activates with the uses the biometric to activate the security key, and the security key gives the proper response, and then the server verifies that it's the correct user and allows access. It's a very smooth process. So these are, this is kind of the overview of the passwordless security keys and smart cards that FEITIAN provides. There's the first five on the four on the left-hand side are non-biometric. So there's a key that uses the Lightning with USB-C is the first one. The multi-pass is a key that has Bluetooth as well as NFC and a connector to USB-A. So in that case, you don't even have to be connected to your computer on that, and it's non-biometric. The next two keys are using the USB slots as well as NFC options. So you can use those, and note that some of them also have the capabilities to work with OTP and other protocols. So if you're using other protocols in your path to passwordless, you have options to use these keys. So it doesn't have to be an immediate transition to doing that to go passwordless. With the K26 and K27 in the middle of the chart, They're using the USB-C for the K26 and USB-A for the K27. Straight biometric keys that have not only FIDO U2F, FIDO2, which is passwordless, but it also, both keys also have FIDO U2F, which is a number of different websites, including Google, that use the security keys as a second factor. And these keys can be used either passwordless or as a universal second factor, and again, with some other protocols if that is desired. The all-in-pass K33 is a small key that has NFC and Bluetooth on there, and again, that has a connector that goes into USB-C. You could also connect that to USB-A if there is a preference to that. But the device does not have to be connected, as we saw in the example, to be used with NFC as well as BLE. And with all the security keys, the major difference between using a security key as compared to a device, whether it's a computer or a smartphone, all these keys are non-connected. So the consideration is for any key that's connected, any device that has authentication that is connected, there may be potential to hack into that or get access into that. There's no way these keys are not emitting anything until they're supposed to, and there's no way for the bad guys to get into these keys. The last three keys are in the smart card or the card format, so they can be used as a wearable. So just to identify, the fingerprint card is can be used for FIDO2 passwordless, and it combines the features of the functions for an identification card, as well as putting in physical access, and you can even add payment to that. And it does not have a battery. And again, with this device, as well as all devices, the fingerprint is stored, collected in the card, by the card, and never ever leaves the card. It's stored cryptographically, and it's not stored as an image of the fingerprint. It's stored as an array of points from the fingerprint on there, so it's very secure in the device. And a timely note on this, that as opposed to fingerprint readers, only the user has to touch any of these devices to use the fingerprints. The next one, the All-In Pass Plus, that is a device that has the battery and has capability of doing the multiple functions as an ID card, an identification card, as well as the passwordless access. It's meant to be a wearable, so you would never take it off. It does have a tethered USB-C, so you can charge it and use it directly. As a side, this is actually a non-passwordless solution, but just to make sure you know about it, we have what is called the campus card, and it has ID and OTP display on it, as well as physical access. So if you have any of those needs, they can be used in that device. So just to summarize, passwordless is very safe. It's an open authentication standard approved by WC3, and it's very high security. The biometric lets you know exactly who uses it, and as you saw, FEITIAN has a number of different protocols. So let's go now. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in, but a quick advertisement again to please complete the survey. We'd ask you just to take a few minutes to do that, and it'll be very helpful for us for Microsoft and FEITIAN to help better serve you. So looking at the questions on here, there was one question, what if the user loses or breaks their key? We have a number of different backup options, and one of the ones that we suggest is to potentially have a second key that you're not using, or using a password in some sort of reset model. Aakashi, do you want to address that at all?
I just want to add one thing. So if the user loses or breaks their key, this should be just considered as any, what happens when you lose the key to your house, right? Like, you need to ensure, you have to educate the users to then report it as soon as possible and then remove the key from their authentication method, right? Like that, it's just also ensuring that you have a good, stringent process and, your users are educated to respond and react responsibly as soon as they identify that their keys are lost.
And that's it. So we work with some partners that, and we have them also in basically a two-pack that you use the key with multiple interfaces on a regular basis, and you have a spare straight USB A or C connection that you would use as the backup. So there's different options and different ways to go about it. And there is the question about if there is, what's the consideration of, since smartphones are highly secure, why can you not use a smartphone as a FIDO2 security key? And you absolutely can. The consideration is that, again, as I mentioned previously, all of the keys that FEITIAN provides and the cards that do the passwordless authentication are non-connected devices. Anything that is connected does have the capability and the potential to be hacked. And just like the passwords were thought to be safe in secure servers, passwords get hacked all the time. And so if you want to have just extra security, and then as Aakashi mentioned, if you have use cases where multiple people are operating on the same device, or using the same device, it's important to have secure ways of doing it.
So
Aakashi, would you like to add?
Yeah,
sure,
I want to add something there. So I do think that the question also had another turn to it. So I think the question also asked, can they use their smartphones as their security key instead of having an additional security key, right? Like considering that it's always there, it's also hardware. So to just answer that, because we have an authenticator app that can be used to sign in as passwordless. The thing is that it's not FIDO2 certified, and that is where I think what Michael is saying makes sense, that for any keys to be FIDO2 certified, there's specific standards that have to be followed, and that is something that is not possible or easily possible today with smartphones. But but that's something that's still under investigation and research. But today you can't use smartphones as a FIDO2 key because, as I said, there are specific standards you have to follow, which is not something that you can do today. But as the user mentioned, it's highly secured hardware and always with users. There's still research going on that.
Another question here asks if there's any special considerations in light of the pandemic. And I think I touched on it briefly, that if organizations are using fingerprint readers, multiple people are touching the readers on a regular basis, as opposed to these devices and these cards. If it's a shared device where multiple people are touching with the biometric, or there's a fingerprint reader being used, it was a different story about 6 or 8 months ago, but now we're all very aware of multiple people touching the same device and what that could possibly do either with the current situation or one in the future. So with the FEITIAN security keys, only the user uses the biometric on the device and only then touches it. Aakashi, would you like to add anything on that one in terms of any special considerations during the pandemic?
No, I think I agree with your answer. So, yeah, nothing to add.
If you do, there was some questions before about people looking for a customized solution because of TP or something like that. Please connect with either Aakashi or myself. FEITIAN is very ready, willing, and available to design and customize a solution for you. I'll be more than happy to assist you with that if you have questions on looking for a device or procedure for your specific need. With that, Aakashi, was there anything else you wanted to add in summary?
I think there's just one thing. I think there's an additional question on MFA, on Azure MFA, and the fact that customers are using another MFA solution, can they still use passwordless login to their hybrid workstation? As of now, no. As of now, Azure MFA is a prerequisite to using passwordless options with Azure AD. So this is something that we are discussing and seeing if that's a possibility, but so far this is a requirement because we want to ensure that you have strong authentication. Can this be used with other Azure solutions? That's something that we can consider, but today you would need Azure MFA.
Awesome, thank you. Let me just do the quick reminder. Are you ready to take action to passwordless? And as we're working with a number of clients, as Aakashi is, it doesn't mean it's on or off, and all of a sudden, presto, you're on passwordless. Although Microsoft does make it easier to do that. If there is a path to passwordless, you can work through to transition from your current MFA to a passwordless solution. On our main website, ftsafe.com, there is a path to passwordless option where we can, in most cases, provide free samples for the passwordless keys to enterprise organizations. Feel free to go there and visit. Again, you can have direct communication with Aakashi or myself, and we'll be more than happy to assist you. We'd like to ask you again to complete the survey. I very, very much appreciate your time and your attendance today in today's call. So at that, I think we're going to conclude it. Was there anything else from you, Aakashi?
No, I think that's all. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating. And as Michael said, please provide your feedback on the survey. And if there are any questions, please feel free to reach out. And I think we'll be sharing material after this call as a wrap-up as well. So thank you so much.
Yes. If you want the material, we'll please contact Aakashi myself. We'll probably have it in a PDF format since there are videos associated with it. That was the other question. Thank you very much for attending, and look forward to talking with you soon.